Hi, I'm Daniel Lucas, and welcome to Book 101. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years, and today I have my special guest. He's the author of the book Girl in the Ashes, no other than Mr. Douglas Weissman.
Hi, thanks for having me back on. I hope that means you like me. Girl in the Ashes is out and exciting, and I am excited to be here.
Yes, people, Girl in the Ashes is out. And let's support Mr. Douglas so that more books to come. So, Mr. Douglas, today let's read one of your favorite chapter.
Absolutely. I would say I have a bunch of favorite chapters. However, I think the one that makes the biggest impact to me is chapter one. The reason because it really sets up the experience, it sets up the ambiance, and gives people the expectation to come. So I'm going to read a little bit. Maybe I'll make it through the whole chapter. We'll see if everybody's still paying attention.
We will, for sure.
Mr. Murad was naked and strapped to the table. A cloth muffled his voice. Odette put on gloves with precision, taking care that each finger slid effortlessly into place. She wished she could burn her fingerprint into his cheek, remind him of the burns he gave his daughter, how he let the cinders brand her shoulder, her legs, or how he ashed his cheroot in her hair. She had followed him for a week, watched as the cigar glowed in his home's midnight darkness, listened to screams as the embers cooled on his daughter's skin each night after dinner, as his wife dipped the dishes in soapy water and hid behind the sounds of the radio. Odette was eager to shove a cigarette into Mr. Murad's eye, but she didn't smoke. She flicked his ear instead. She stood in the apartment cellar and brought a peach to her mouth. The flesh was soft, the juice rolled down her lips, slipped onto her chin, and splattered on the floor. She took a cloth to wipe away the juice. A collection of clay plates, pots, and cups rose out of the dust on the table behind her. They had a rudimentary design, homemade. She placed her dripping peach in a bowl. Another peach in the bowl had rotted, its fuzz black with mold. A maggot wiggled in the flesh. The table surrounded neat stacks of wood, framing the pieces like a cabinet. The fire in the kiln flailed, and the heat prickled her skin. Mr. Murad thrashed about the table and whimpered. Calm down, Mr. Murad, Odette said. She ran her finger down his cheek and wiped away a bead of sweat dripping from his bald head. He looked like a mole, with dark eyes, marble sunken into his face, Odette thought. He should have stayed with the other moles underground, the vermin. His cheek felt sticky against her glove. He didn't try to scream. Outside, the street had an eerie quiet. She normally watched random feet shuffle past through the cloudy basement window, but the absence of life made her shiver. A rhythmic thump disrupted the silence. It had sounded like a storm in the distance, rolling slowly across the fields until it landed in the city. But the rain never came, only the thunder. Mr. Murad thrashed again, with a series of low thumps that imitated the storm brewing in the distance. He had exhausted his voice from the hours he had screamed without success. It was the same every time. They all started with threats, promising the different ways they could take their revenge on her. When that proved fruitless, they screamed, hoping someone would hear their stifled cries, would notice they had been missing for a day or two. Then they begged for their lives. They apologized. They offered riches. They vowed to change, as if her mother had been given the same mercy from the grocer, as if he would have given someone else the mercy for which all men now asked. No, thought Odette, for which they begged. Mr. Murad flinched and moaned. You have something to say, Mr. Murad? She took the cloth from his mouth. He stretched his jaw. His voice was hoarse, like he had swallowed sand. Please, he said, forgive me. I know better now. Odette stifled a yawn. Of course you do, Mr. Murad. Odette shoved the rotten peach in his mouth. He gagged. She took her knife and severed his ear. He couldn't scream. She waited. He spat spittle and chunks of mold. He gurgled. Saliva wept down his cheeks. She stuffed the rag in his mouth, pushing the remaining peach farther down his throat. The thunder outside grew louder. You all know better. Once you are on the table. Death has a funny way of revealing first the worst in people, then the best. Was it not just last night you promised to, what was it? Rip out my womb and have your wife roast it for dinner? She leaned over and whispered into the severed ear. She nearly touched her lips to the blood leaking to his neck, a false intimacy she craved. He let out another muffled cry. The truth is, Mr. Murad, you might be sorry. You may even be forgiven. Mr. Murad closed his eyes, a sign of relief, the reaction Odette had hoped for. But not by me. Odette traced her finger from down his neck, brushing the glove against the wispy hairs on his shoulder and arm. She craved this moment, the realization of death, of finality, of regret. She savored their eyes when they glimmered, the look, how they went from hope to despair until the last second right before they passed out. Odette wondered about the glimmer. She wondered if it came from seeing God, not death, because to them, to herself, she was death. She would eternally wear the mask to them, for them, but in that last second of their waking life, the glimmer would show in their eyes, and they would even smile. But then, she would miss it if she blinked. A look of terror would set in. That was when Odette believed they had been received. They had been measured, and then they had been denied. And she witnessed all of it. She took Mr. Murad's wrist, ready to slit her knife down the vein. The thunder pounded against the building and shook the room. Jackboots marched down the street, the jagged stream of successive boots visible through the frosted window. Mr. Murad's wrist slipped from Odette's hand. Her fingers shook. She tried to blink the cellar into focus but couldn't concentrate. The fire in the kiln heated the basement. She reached down for his wrist once more, but he flailed and hit her in the nose. Damn it! She caught hold of his arm, dug her nails into his skin, and sliced at the veins. She dropped his arm and took a deep breath as the blood dribbled out and tapped into the waiting bucket. She turned back to the table where her butcher's knife sat near the collection of clay cups, bowls, and plates. Mr. Murad screamed and flailed once again. Blood squirted from his arm as he pulled away his straps, reached for the gag in his mouth, and fell to the floor. His face pressed to the concrete. Blood draped over the floor like dark velvet. Odette bent over Mr. Murad's body, sat on his back, her composure gone. Look at the mess you made, she said. It could have been so much easier if you just stopped squirming. She took her knife and dug deeper into his skin, twisting the blade into the artery until blood flooded out of his wrist like a wave crashing against the cliffs. She dropped his arm in the carpet of dark velvet, enveloping the stone. It splattered across her apron, across her shoes, across her face once more, baptizing her in the blood. No one escapes their mess, she thought. She breathed and breathed again, each inhalation slower than the last. She wiped her hands on her apron and patted her hair. Perhaps this baptism would be the last, the final body exsanguinated, burned, evaporated, her final purification into a world she never asked to be part of. The fire in the kiln roared. Normally, she loved the sound of the fire. It made her think of an animal, a beast, hungry for whatever she would feed it. It listened to her commands, so it could also bite. The scars on her hands a testament to its hunger. The kiln was her reflection, the fire that roared inside of her, one that faded after she fed it but never died. She stood from the body knowing the blood would dry and wash away, leaving only traces of her cleansing until the stains, like the memories of Mr. Murad, disappeared. She ignored how her shoes splashed in the puddle that had formed around Mr. Murad. She threw his shirt, his pants, his socks, and his shoes into the firebox with the wood. She grabbed the butcher's knife from the table. Mr. Murad lay limp on the floor, far from the man he pretended to be at his home, at the bank, when he beat his wife, when he put the cigarettes on his daughter's back. The thunder on the street grew louder. Dust shook free from the ceiling and rained over the cellar. The boots on the cobblestone stomped and scraped and stomped in unison. Odette squeezed the knife's handle tighter until her knuckles turned white. The fire in the kiln raged. You're ruining everything, she whispered to the window, and the boots kept stomping past, trampling the words Odette let slip onto the street unaware, uncaring, unashamed of how the thunder shook the city. So that was chapter 1.
Bravo.
Thank you. I know a lot happens. There's a lot of blood involved.
Lots of blood. And Mr. Douglas, when you're writing this book, what the initial step to begin the process?
Well, the initial step was just the inspiration. My wife was talking to me about just the concept. We were really into the show Dexter at the time. This was years ago, and I had never seen it. She was showing it to me for the first time. And while we were visiting a little area in kind of central California for my cousin's wedding, she just had the idea, oh, what if it was a woman serial killer in World War II Paris? And my mind just started spinning out into, well, what would that be like? What control would she have? What made her a serial killer? What was her intention and purpose? And all of those questions kind of roared into this snowball that needed a response.
Interesting, Mr. Douglas. Also, how important is outlining the girl in the ashes?
For me, I am not a big outliner, and that's just my process. I know people who are incredible at outlining. I am a pantser. I write and write and write. I really have no set direction, I'd say. I kind of just think of what is a moment that I can put this character or the surrounding characters into, and then let's see how they react. And that not only gives me a better understanding of the character, but it can set the plot in motion based upon how they react to that scenario. For example, there's one character, Aloysius, who is kind of the best friend slash love interest of Odette in this story. And I knew he was a coward. I knew that that's one of his defining qualities, but also the shame of his cowardice is something that continues through his thread that makes him make bad decisions. He makes the wrong decision thinking that it will show his bravery when really it just demonstrates further cowardice on his part. And I thought, well, what if I put him in a certain situation? And it's very early on in the book, but you see him as part of kind of a riot guard trying to put down a peaceful protest of students. And he makes continuously the wrong decisions. But I didn't know that he was going to make those decisions originally. I thought I'm going to put him in this situation and we're going to see what happens. And so it's just moments like that that help drive the plot in my head on the page. But because I'm not a outliner, I have to go through and reread everything and figure out, this is a scene that needs to go in this space, and this scene needs to go further down in this timeline, et cetera, et cetera. Otherwise, it would be a jumbled, disconnected mess.
For sure. So, what techniques did you help you to developing compelling and believable characters for Girl in the Ashes?
The first one I always do is a character interview. Some people call it a sketch, some people call it just a questionnaire, but I always go through and ask myself a bunch of questions about a character to try and really get an understanding of who they are, how they act, what I think their personality is like. One time I had a friend say, "Oh, I always cast them in a movie. Like if Girl in the Ashes was going to be a movie, who would I want Odette to be? Or who do I want to Odette to be played by?" And I am not as thorough that way. What I usually do is connect them to somebody I know. It doesn't necessarily mean that they are an exact representation of that person, but they do take on certain personality traits. And in that way, I have a great understanding of how stubborn is this person. Oh, well, if I'm connecting Odette to this person I know, then she's going to be incredibly stubborn. And that personality trait, even just giving her that one trait, helps me really flesh her out as a person instead of a character. So as I move along, she's making the decisions, she's taking the actions, and I'm just kind of dictating it onto the page.
Very well said, Mr. Douglas. So, how did you choose the right setting of your story and why is it important?
There's no other place that this story could be placed. And part of that is because of the scenario. Occupied Paris in World War II is iconic. And it's also, I think, misunderstood. So many people who might even be somewhat versed in World War II history believe that France, or at least the way that it was divided, was pretty much under the thumb of Nazi regime and German belief systems, when really Paris specifically, even as an open city, was actually guarded and was governed by the French, and therefore most of the atrocities that took place in Paris at that time were by the French government that was in place. And I feel like it's something that either people don't know, something gets overlooked, something that people forget about. And I feel it's important to continuously bring back into the conversation. I remember the first time I learned how deep that rule went was when I read Sarah's Key, which came out, boy, I think over a decade ago now, maybe even 15 years or more. But it was something that I had never heard of, with the Valdiv roundup, when it was the French government that rounded up the Jewish community in Paris at that time and put them in the Valdiv and then shipped them off to concentration camps. And I feel like that part of history needs to be remembered, needs to be shared. So I thought Girl in the Ashes placing it in Paris is another way to represent that history, but through a very different lens. So people don't just think it's another Holocaust book. It's something much more that provides, as I said before, I believe with you, it provides kind of a Trojan horse into World War II and Holocaust history, a different guise for people who might not necessarily come to Holocaust history with a particular understanding or even an interest in it. But now, from this perspective, in Paris with a serial killer, you get this greater awareness.
Yes, interesting, Mr. Douglas. So, how can you ensure the girl in the ashes theme is clearly communicated and impactful?
Boy, I don't know. I hope I'm doing it well. I mean, one of the things that I've always felt about this book is it approaches the concept of the grayness of morality. That idea of the ends justifies the means. How much are we willing to give up on the morality if there's a positive outcome? That concept of like, what are you willing to do to kind of get what you want? And that idea of, is it okay to murder somebody that you disagree with? And if the person's doing something terrible, what does justice look like? And it's not necessarily, and not supposed to be, an easy question. And that's part of the difficulty of these conversations. There's no black and white, but I feel like in today's atmosphere across a lot of areas of the globe, people want things to be easy. They want it to be a black and white conversation, and they generally aren't. And I think overall it's becoming a core message of Girl in the Ashes, that there's no easy conversation. You have to look at the gray area. You have to have the difficult conversation. And it's not about trying to prove whether you're right or wrong. It's trying to understand the different perspectives in order to come to a better outcome.
Yes, definitely better outcome, people. So, what are the role does research play in enhancing the authenticity of Curl in the Ashes?
Oh, research was paramount to making sure that this could get done. And it was across the board. Something as simple as whether they used zippers on their pants at the time in fashion could be something that completely throws a reader out of the story. And luckily, I didn't have to go that into that level of detail, but I did have to understand, what does Paris in the 1930s slash early 40s look like? What did the occupation look like? What were the restaurants that were open to German and French citizens at the time? What did the ticketing system look like, or the voucher system for food look like at the time? How were people eating? What was their calorie count looking like? I mean, all of these things were part of not only the atmosphere, but the daily life at the time, and therefore had to be part of Odette's daily life. Otherwise, it wouldn't feel real. So I took deep dives into a lot of different areas. The library became my best friend. My wife helped. My wife is an incredible researcher. She helped me find kind of the right books that explained just different elements of life, of war, of even being, say, an orphan at the time. Not every book that I read gave me the information I needed in large swaths, but I could walk away with just a piece of information that ended up going somewhere in the book and made it feel real with that texture of life at the time. And research is such a great benefit, and being able to research in depth in this day and age is a lot easier than I think it would have been if I was doing this 20, 30 years ago. At the same time, it's really easy to have research be a crutch or a stall tactic, something to say, well, I haven't researched XYZ yet, so I can't start writing the book. So there came a point when I had to just stop and say, I have this, I need to start writing, and if I come to a point where I need to fill in something, I'll have to go back, but I have to push forward.
Definitely. So, Mr. Douglas, before we go on, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, Food 101, our fourth season with Chef Alessandro, one of the best executive chef in one of the five-star hotel in downtown Toronto. Please do listen to our latest episode. We talk about our Food 101 culinary course. Yes, people, we are offering our Food 101 culinary course, Volume 1 Basics is all about how to create a delicious food. So please purchase our full Food 101 Culinary Course Volume 1 Basics, Volume 2 Fundamentals, Volume 3 Principles. So Mr. Douglas, how would you effectively manage pacing to maintain reader interest throughout The Girl in the Ashes?
Well, I don't want to tie this in directly, but I do have to say that food plays an important role in this. And so, with the culinary course, Culinary 101, my experience and background working in a restaurant helped me understand the way to talk to people and get them interested in the food that they're about to eat. And I subverted that idea within Girl in the Ashes to make it actually unpalatable, to make it a bit grotesque. Within chapter one, the idea of the peach, how it's tender, how it's soft, how it's fleshy, and you think how juicy it can be, and it kind of makes your mouth water. But then to turn it rotten is something I thought a way to bring people in, but then also affect them viscerally. And I thought, how can I do that throughout the story at a pace? And so one of the instructors I had when I was in grad school said, if you give people something really dramatic, something really heightened in tension, then you have time, you have space to go back and slow things down a bit. People kind of need a reprieve from that heightened tension in order to recuperate. And that's what I thought about. All right, if I start with this high intensity moment with Odette, you watch her murder somebody and you watch how her world is changing immediately. The next scene, we could slow down a bit. Now you're interested in this person, you're interested in this world, you're interested how she got here. So let's introduce another character and demonstrate their dynamic in order for you to get closer to the world, closer to her, but at a slower, more intimate level without murder. And then after that, we can start to raise things again slowly until we reach another emotional peak that gets you invested again. And then after that, we can slow it down once more. It's kind of like building a mixtape, or I guess a mix playlist now, because nobody listens to tapes. But so it's kind of like building a playlist. If you have every single song cranked up to 11, you lose the attention span, you lose interest. But if you build up, if you have a big, powerful song, and then slow it down and build back up again, and then slow it down until finally you reach that one song that just boom, floor it, pedal to the metal. It's the thing that gets you dancing. It's the thing that gets you singing the most. And then after that, and so that's kind of the climax of the entire story. It's how can we climb that staircase until we reach that peak and then bring it back down.
Very well said, Mr. Douglas. So, in what ways can dialogue be used to reveal character and advance the plot?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. I think that dialogue is about not answering what the other person is talking about. And I don't know if it drives people crazy, but that's how I use dialogue. It's usually a back and forth that seem like two separate conversations until finally you realize they're both talking around each other and they're both talking around the issue. Usually, in every class I think I've ever had, Hemingway's Hills Like White Elephants is usually the example that gets passed around. There are so many other examples as well, including what we talk about when we talk about Anne Frank is also a great example. People in real life don't talk straightforward about their feelings, and they don't talk straightforward about the elephant in the room, which is the whole reason why that phrase exists, because there's something gigantic sitting in the room that nobody's addressing. That's what I feel dialogue is supposed to do. By talking around the subject, around the issue. You create more tension. You build the kind of, I always equate it to a volcano. The lava's bubbling beneath the surface. And it's only when the dialogue from all parties involved, it's only when all the parties involved address that elephant that the lava finally comes to the surface and explodes. But you have to build it. You have to let that bubble beneath the surface. Otherwise, if the volcano just explodes, there's no tension building. There's nothing for people to anticipate. And that's what tension is. Tension is anticipation. So dialogue needs to create anticipation by showing you who this character is by how they talk, what they say, how they do or do not address an issue. Then driving the plot forward, because that misunderstanding, and this is typical in romantic comedies, right? There's misunderstanding along the way where you think if all they do is say the one thing they need to say, that's not what I meant. It was a misunderstanding, blah, blah, blah. But that misunderstanding goes on for 150 pages, which just digs them deeper, digs them deeper, digs them deeper. So without dialogue to help do those things of revealing character by showing what they are or are not, talking about who they are, how they feel, how they react to things, and then also put breadcrumbs leading to the next plot point. It doesn't have to be a direct conversation of we're going to go search for this treasure, because that, again, it's not, that's too direct, right? It has to be something about personal connection to a thing. So I know I feel like I tangentially, I put a tangent at the end of like, oh no, personal connection is also a thing. But no, that speaks back to how it reveals character. So
Yes.
it's difficult to condense, I feel like, and I'm doing a terrible job right now. But if you do those things, if you sit there and think, how is this person going to react? Why do they react that way? What is their personality like? What is the word choices to use for character X versus character Y? That is character revelation. That is how they demonstrate who they are through dialogue. Then, in those moments, you will pretty much be advancing the plot on its own.
Yes, anticipation, people. And Mr. Douglas, what strategies can help in overcoming writer's block during the book writing? Oh, Girl in the Ashes.
For me, it's always about going for a walk. It is the one strategy I have that always works. It's because I remove myself from the project. I don't think about it. The longer I sit and stare at a blank screen or stare at a blank piece of paper, the more I feel like I'm slamming my head against a wall. The more I try to force something, the less something comes. So I put on a playlist, put on a podcast, take my dog, go for a walk. Sometimes my dog hates it when I'm really stuck and we have to do like 3 walks. And she's like, no, just go without me because my dog is lovely but lazy. Sometimes I will go without it.
For
But
sure.
it's just the walking. It's just removing myself from the process lets my brain take a break and something will come up organically. I had this happen a week ago with the new book that I'm writing. I was stuck on what a particular symbol was supposed to represent. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, on a walk, oh, there it is. Now I have it. And I was able to move forward.
Good job, Mr. Douglas, and very well said. So, what is your inspiring message for those new aspiring or new writers out there?
You just have to keep going. I think that new writers, well, from my experience when I was a new writer and working with new writers, there's this expectation of perfection. It doesn't exist. Perfection is just another way to expect writer's block. It's a way to procrastinate, thinking that you have to have a perfect sentence or a perfect story before you're even able to write. That's not how writing works. That's not how being a doctor works. That's not how being an artist works. You have to practice. You have to edit. You have to learn. You don't get a perfect story the first time or even the second time. My first book went through 12 drafts. That's after I wrote the entire thing. Then I edited it 12 times. Girl in the Ashes went through 7 drafts. Again, that's not including the times that I might have edited just one single chapter on its own. That is, when the book was complete, how many times did I edit it, and then still had to send it to an editor who edited it more. There is no such thing as perfection in writing. You just have to keep going. That's just keep going, and that will get you to where you want to be.
Yes, people, keep going and stop procrastinating. Who knows, you will be one of the best, like Mr. Douglas Weissman. So, Mr. Douglas, can you please invite our listeners to support all your books?
Absolutely. Girl in the Ashes is available on Amazon, on Barnes & Noble, on bookshop.org. You can find it in all these places. I also have a more literary book that came out in 2022 called Life Between Seconds. You can find that, again, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, bookshop.org. It's also available at Target if that is your preferred place to shop. That one is a little slower, a little more intimate in terms of the character development, but it still has a lot of juicy things to chew on, especially if you like really beautiful imagery and a little more travel involved in your reading.
Congratulations for the success of Girl in the Ashes, Mr. Douglas, and I hope more books to come. And people, let's support Mr. Douglas. As I said, more if you support him, more books to come. So, Mr. Douglas, thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me. I always love being here, and I hope people enjoy listening to me.
Yes, they love your episode. Your episodes. You have already 3 episodes for Book 101 review. So let's continue doing it.
Happy to. Very happy to.
Monica people, see you soon.